Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for August 6th, 2021. I'm Benji Fisher moderating. Paolo Enrique Coto Starling is sharing his screen and he'll start us off. Also in the meeting are Aaron McHale, Clayton, Emily Nouveau, Gibor Hotzi, and Thomas Howell. We have a good mix of front-end and back-end developers, designers, site builders. Don't know if I've left anyone out. I think we also have a mix of people for whom English is a first language and people for whom it's not. And anyone on the meeting, if it's easier for you to type rather than speak, then feel free to use the chat. I'll keep an eye on it and I'll read your comments into the recording. So Paolo, please take it away.
Okay, the first issue we'll talk about today is the issue number 987978 to move the administrator role setting to another page. And currently, the setting to this feature is in the account settings, but this is a role setting and not an accounting setting. So that's why this issue was created. And that's it. So a patch here was created. And if we look at the Drupal site with the patch applied, this setting is moved to this page here. And I had the idea to bring this issue to this meeting to discuss about it and to see if you agree with it, with this change or not.
Why not on the roles tab?
You mean people? You mean here?
Yeah.
Yes, it's here as well.
So I like this idea, and I think partly to speak a little to Gabor's point, I think one of the principles in some designs of forms and things is to try and keep like as minimal information on one page, so not to clutter individual forms. So I kind of like that it's in its own tab, but I think there's potentially a missed opportunity here because I could see this being expanded in the future to potentially allow also defining, in addition to the administrator role, defining what the role for anonymous users is and what the role for authenticated users is. So if say a profile is someone's building a profile, for instance, and they have a different interpretation of what those roles do, they are not forced to use those hard-coded machine names of anonymous and authenticated. So I actually see some potential here, but I like that it's on its own sort of, if you like, role settings screen. But I think we would do ourselves a favor to maybe not make this particular new form too specific to the administrator role. To give ourselves the flexibility to further expand it in the future.
Okay, so you mean to change it here to just role settings, right?
Yes, something like that, I would say. I mean, I don't know what other people think, because that's a slight change from what the issue is proposing. So it'd be great to get other people's input there.
It sounds reasonable to me, the recommendation you're making, Aaron. It is nice having the role settings on its own tab, but I tend to not be a fan of creating an entire tab with the sole purpose of a single setting. So even if this is the only setting that's there, it is setting up a pattern. Even if we don't do it in core, it sets up the pattern for contrib modules if people wanted to do that. And so to me, that makes a lot of sense. And it kind of helps to address my concerns with only having this here and not on the roles pages. That this now then differentiates the settings versus actual roles, and they have different purposes. So I like that.
And that's a pattern we have elsewhere in core. For example, for views, we have the list of all the views, which is a somewhat overwhelming page. And then we have a separate tab for view settings.
One thing I'm just noticing is the URL. Is it, so I see it's people permissions roles. Is that, what's the URL for the actual roles screen?
What do
Oh,
you
so
mean
that's
people
people
roles?
roles. Okay, that's interesting. Wonder if we can, wonder why that is.
Can you repeat, please, the end of what you said?
Yeah, sorry, I was just saying, I was just wondering why it's, I guess that was, I'm just wondering how it ended up with the URL being in that structure, like how this page is sitting under the permissions page in the URL, but I guess one, we maybe want to look at that as well.
I don't get it. Sorry.
So
Which page?
hierarchically speaking, the tabs should be at the same level, but it appears that roles and administrator role settings are at different levels. So if you compare
okay.
them, rather than being roles and then role settings under the same level, you're seeing something that looks like it's roles in two different places.
Yes.
So that just it is structurally not sound.
Okay. Yeah, so I would change it to people / roles / settings. So whatever the URL for roles is, but just adding on settings on the end of it.
I wouldn't do roles / settings. I would do roles _ settings, or whatever the current
dash.
Drupal pattern is.
Right. Okay. Oh, that, yeah.
You don't want to, because that implies like different hierarchical levels.
Right. Yeah. No, that I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Like this,
It's
right?
just shifting the problem. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
You could just call it settings. It could be people _ settings, but I think role settings is more specific, and that's better.
Yeah.
Like this?
Precisely, as long as they are similar next to one another, that is great. It could be roles _ settings or just settings. Both will work for administrative role settings. Assuming it becomes role settings, I'm just saying roles and role settings should be at the same hierarchical level, so they should be people / whatever you want to call them. So
okay.
that would be roles _ settings, and that would look.
I'm curious,
Yeah.
are there other settings for a role that maybe other contrib modules provide that anyone knows of?
I'm not sure.
Because I understand the motivation for wanting to make it more flexible, but then I guess the drawback there is that right now it's very apparent what this tab is. It's for setting what the administrator role is, and otherwise. But if I don't, I've never come across that in my own work, but maybe others have.
But what Aaron was suggesting, there is definitely room in someone's design for it. Meaning, if you wanted to assign anonymous to a different named role, it would permit you to do that, and that would fall under this tab.
Okay.
Structurally. And so it's not that it exists or that someone has done it, but it's putting a tab and a URL for just a single setting doesn't make sense. At that point, I would agree with one of the earlier suggestions. This setting belongs under roles. However, if you're expanding roles to be different settings, having more than one option, then you're essentially, it has more purpose. Otherwise, you're adding in an extra URL and you're making things more complex unnecessarily.
Yeah. I guess that's what I was trying to get at with my question, is figuring out if there really is enough circumstances to warrant this approach rather than just having the administrator role setting worked
I would
into
assume
another page. Yeah.
I would assume it's an enterprise level scenario, so that like if you have a site that has 30 different roles and you take a couple of those roles and you're changing other machine name roles in the system, this would be the tab you'd go to do that. You would add that capacity here. You're not going to see something in a 3 or 4 person site. You're not going to see this. People aren't going to be messing with the role settings. There's not going to be a lot of different roles being added in all likelihood.
Yeah, I think in most of the time, like people don't change what the administrator role is, but what I'm envisioning here is like maybe a couple of follow-up issues or one follow-up issue that actually to finally make it so that the authenticated and anonymous roles, Drupal doesn't assume what their like ID is, and we actually add options here to configure it, potentially vault issues, or potentially that's a contrib module, I don't know, but we already do it for the administrator role. So if we set up the potential for it here, then that makes it easier to do in the future.
It sets up the pattern for the content editor role. Like if there were other systematic core roles like that, they would all be potentially here. And then you'd be able to change the names around to whatever people were comfortable, but you would have a predictable machine name pattern to be building your contrib modules around, or your profiles, and that would dovetail nicely with the work we did a couple of months ago, where we were working on adding in those 2 additional content roles. And so it's just establishing a pattern that says for fixed roles in Drupal, this is how you ensure that they're always available and fixable in a predictable way, but you can do it for all of those predictable roles. And it decouples them from whatever you want to call them in terms of the actual role name. The behavior is decoupled from the predicted behavior is decoupled from what it's actually called, because you set it here.
Paolo, can you show us the account settings page? The
Yes.
page where it's found without the...
It's...
Don't you already have it in that other tab?
Yes, sorry.
So it seems to me that if you're going to be moving the administrator select list, then also the anonymous users should be moved along with it. So now we'll have 2 things to choose on that form rather than just one, which answers some earlier objections. And I think these, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, because this has been a point of confusion, I think, for a long time, and I think I've seen an issue about it. So like that field there, the anonymous one, doesn't in any way work with the role. It's purely what the word Drupal uses to describe, like if someone comments as an anonymous user, I think that's what is used. So again, that's not to do with the role. Like that's again another point of confusion. I think that's this issue might help to address.
Okay, never mind.
Is there any other role setting in Drupal that we should move to the new tab if we add it?
Yeah, so I'm still not sure whether I like having the separate tab, or as Gabor suggested at the start, putting it on the on the existing roles tab. Can you show us that tab as well?
This tab?
No, the roles tab. So of course, this is just a standard Drupal installation, and a real site might have a lot more roles. But yeah, even a site with a lot of roles, this page is not overwhelming. It'll be many rows, but each one will just have a label and a drop button. It's not that complicated. And if we add the settings at the bottom, I think I kind of preferred the way you have it on a separate tab. As I said earlier, that follows the same pattern as views.
I've also seen I've seen sites with a ton of roles, and once it pushes off the bottom, if you don't know where to be looking for it, it isn't super intuitive to look here for settings at the bottom of that list. So yeah, I agree it's not complex, but calling it out is something that we've done elsewhere, and a setting is different than a role. Those are different things, the same way permissions are different than a role. So I prefer it on a separate tab pretty strongly. But I like it anonymized, or not anonymized. I like it without the administrator. I prefer just role settings.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Naming things is important, and making the name more generic makes it easier to add things to that page in the future. So it sounds like we have consensus that this is a good idea, with just changing the name of the tab and probably changing the URL. Am I wrong? Does anyone not like it or think there should be additional changes?
The only thing I would suggest is, and I don't know if we have a precedent as to whether because I'm looking at like role underscore settings, and I think role dash settings might be better, but I like as a hyphen instead of an underscore, but I'm not sure if we have a precedent for which one we use. I have a feeling it's the hyphen instead of the underscore.
Yeah, I'm fine with either. And if you think that this should just be people settings, that may also be the though I guess it kind of makes me wonder why we call it people when everything here is really about roles. So I'm not going to open that can of worms because that's completely re-architecting it. But I mean, settings may just be the simplest approach. I don't know.
I think if we leave it as just settings, the risk is that we slightly confuse the purpose of what then the account settings form is for, and then we just end up back where we started with role settings and user settings being conflated on the same form.
Sure. So then whatever the standard is, there has to be a standard to use either a hyphen or an underscore, like whatever the standard is in Drupal is what I would use here.
Yeah, I think we just uncovered another funny UX quirk in Drupal, because I'm looking at it and it looks like every administration page that's provided by Drupal core uses an underscore, but then, for example, if you create a vocabulary that's, say, like event type, then it's the path is structure / taxonomy event underscore type. So there's some inconsistency there in URL patterns.
I thought the pattern was underscore for anything that was hard coded in Drupal, and then anything that was generated added a hyphen. That's what I seem to recall, but I don't know if that's common.
That's what it's looking like to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that would fit with like, because when Drupal generates machine names, it replaces spaces with a hyphen. So the URL ends up having a hyphen in it usually. So that's something about what you're saying there. So it does sound familiar. So maybe it is an underscore we put here.
Yeah, it does sound like an underscore would be right, but I don't think the underscore versus hyphen is something that we should be talking about on this this call. That can be handled on the issue. Is just raise the point and they can decide. So Paolo, can you post a comment summarizing the discussion, or would you like someone else to help with that?
No, I can do it. It's no problem for me.
Okay. Any other comments on this issue before we move on?
Just one question about the hyphen or underscore. It doesn't matter, right?
It's not a usability question. It's not something we
Okay.
need to discuss right now.
Okay, so for me, it's enough.
You'll certainly have to get it straight before it gets committed. I see a few more people have joined the call. Christina Chumias, M, and Gabriel Abdallah.
Yes, I joined late because I was in another discussion, so I just want to follow up. I work with Paulo.
Okay, thank you. And
M is just Emily Nouveau again.
Okay. And Gabrielle, do you have any issues you'd like to bring up?
No, I'm actually new to the community, and I'm trying to get involved in the meetings and the issues. I'm still learning. Okay.
Okay. Good. And Christina, did you have any issues you'd like to bring up?
No, I don't have anything for this week. Sorry.
Okay, so let's turn to some of the things that were suggested on Slack. Paolo, if you'll stop sharing your screen, I can share mine. Let me just find the right window. Here we go. So here's the issue for today's meeting, 322-6180. And I think update location.hash. This is something that Nod brought up. Let me see his specific comment from Slack. What did he say? It's a small question about URL hashes and browser back button. So this issue introduces a change in the vertical tabs where the URL is updated after clicking a tab. Usually that would mean that it adds a step to the browser history. So let's see, can I scroll a screenshot? So here's vertical tabs, and I guess the question is what happens as you click through the vertical tabs? Does it trigger a page reload, or is it just done with, I guess, JavaScript to show some and hide others? So I think the current behavior, I guess, is that it does not cause a page reload, and this would trigger that. So what it means, one, in the regular scenario, user opens the edit form with vertical tabs and clicks on two vertical tabs. And then if you click the back button, you have to click several times to get away from the page you're currently viewing. And with the patch, if you click between vertical tabs, then the first time you click the back button, you move away from the edit form. So that makes it sound like I had it backwards, that the current behavior is that it does trigger a page reload. So let's see. I should be able to test that. What's a good admin page with some vertical tabs? What's in the screenshot here?
Well, there's account settings, which has a whole load.
Ah, so it does.
Stick it with the theme, I guess.
Yes, and luckily I already had that that page open. So let's keep an eye on the address bar as I click through the vertical tabs. Oh, so this is what I thought at first. It's not changing the URL. It's not causing a page reload. But maybe. So yes, the first click on the back button takes me away from the page. So this is what I thought.
So I think the issue is trying to add a hash so that you don't get taken away from the page. You can actually go back through the different vertical tabs.
So it wouldn't be a page reload, but it would change the URL by adding a hash and an anchor tag.
Yes, I think.
So
Yeah,
I guess.
I think that's because they were looking at a couple. One of those was that one of the options, and then there was another option they were trying to decide between as well. Oh no, I see. Yeah, it was to decide if we keep the current behavior or implement this new approach of using the anchor tags. Okay, yeah.
Right, so I guess the issue is already RTBC, and we're asking at this point whether it's a good idea or not. Let me scroll quickly to the bottom. Recent comments. The decision was made in comment 29 up here. So the comment 5 years ago is that in usability testing, we see that when people initially arrive at the node add page, they click in all the vertical tabs trying to figure out what they do. And because the URL changes several times in the process, if user hits the back button, it's going to appear to be broken because the only thing that's changing is subtly up in the URL, not in the entire page display. Like in Gmail, Twitter, etc., that use similar path hacks. So I think we need to account for this in the patch somehow so it remembers where back should ultimately link to.
So I just tested in Gmail, and back does navigate through the hashes. It doesn't go back before the page, at least anywhere I was testing. But it sounds like the proposal is actually to skip over the hashes.
So if I click through them in order, and current behavior and with the patch, a single click of the back button would take me to whatever page I was on previously, move me off of this page. And the question is whether instead of doing that, clicking the back button should take me to these various vertical tabs.
Am I right in understanding?
I just wanted to say I don't have a strong opinion on this.
Emily, in the Gmail case, is that, and I have to remember back because I don't use Gmail actually these days, but is it that that's like in the settings screen when you're navigating across the settings tabs, and with like changing folders, it does that with the hashes or anchor tags?
Yeah, so changing folders in your inbox, it changes anchor tags. But when you hit
Okay.
back, it also sends you through the different folders.
Right. I think there's a bit of an argument there around, like, in the Gmail case, the majority of your screen is taken up like by those tabs, if you like in any normal scenario, those would be like separate page loads. But in this case, this is like a subset of the page. And I was just looking at the UK government's design system, which is often considered one of the sort of gold standards of user-centered design and human-centered design. And their tabs component does not add a hash to the URL. So let me put a link to that into the Zoom chat, because they haven't read over it actually, but everything on there is generally well researched and comes with guidelines. So maybe we can use that as a sort of as one of the indicators as to whether this is a good idea or not.
So this URL is design-system.service.gov.uk/components/tabs.
That's right. And you can see some examples there on the page, and their ones, you'll notice, don't update the URL when you click through the tabs.
I'm sorry, you're saying there's a live example here?
Yeah, so you can see if you click on those tabs, you can actually see them move.
Right, so this, except that they're horizontal, this is very similar to Drupal's vertical tabs.
They also have an accordion pattern, which also follows a similar behavior, but is obviously accordions are slightly different. It's actually accordions are kind of the same idea, but
So accordions on a different page, yes. I guess there's always the question of whether opening one should close the others. And now if, oh, the back button is grayed out, so I guess that means that that the accordion behavior is different from their tab behavior.
so it looks like under the research section, one of the links they give is to an inclusive components.design /tabbed interface, or sorry, tabbed dash interfaces. And that might also be, that was used as looks like one of the resources that uses the foundation for the design of this component. I'm just trying to see if it mentions anything about using anchor tags or not.
Is this the link you're talking about? More research?
It definitely seems like, sorry, anchor tags seem like they would help make things more accessible because people can quickly get to the content they're being linked to instead of having to look for it.
Would an anchor tag also allow you to have a shortcut to it?
Yes.
It's true. Yeah, there's that link there. Inclusive components is the one I was mentioning.
Yeah, and as far as like context goes, we're talking about tabs in an editing interface, whereas this is tabs in like a presentation. And someone brought up a good point in the issue queue in the discussion that if you hit the back button and you're taken out of an editing page, you're more likely to be backing out of something that you're in the middle of editing, which is really frustrating. And I know that people use working tabs to make a complex form, break it into more manageable sections. And so being kept on the page and going back to the tab that you were working in rather than the previous page and leaving the edit page entirely, I think is the better user experience there.
And I guess it depends on your browser. What will happen if you accidentally tab away from the form you're trying to fill out and then go back? Let's just do a quick little test. If I enter something in a text area and navigate away from the page and then back, yeah, the browser saved that. So that's at least Firefox, and that's at least text area.
So the article from Inclusive Design has Inclusive Components.design, somewhere near the bottom has a section called when panels are views, and that's quite interesting because it makes a distinction between when what the difference between a panel and a view would be and how that would behave. So like a panel being what we see in the editing form, where a view what you might see in Gmail, for instance, and how there's maybe something distinguishing those. In the case of views, it talks about using links and it gives the example of using the anchor tags. But it also then suggests that you should also, if you do that, it seems to suggest sort of do other things like updating the focus, obviously, but also like updating the title tag to change the page title.
So can we come up with a firm recommendation in the next 15 minutes? Or is the best we can do to supply some links for further reading and further discussion on the issue?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have any firm suggestions other than what you've just said, but also be interesting to get input from the accessibility maintainers on this, which I presume will happen anyway, because they'll probably take a very similar view using the ideas like this article talks about. I could possibly also pose the question to some of my colleagues who work in user design and see what they say.
Okay, and Aaron, you're the one who came up with these references, so maybe you could start by adding a comment suggesting that they consider these.
Yeah, sure, I can do, and I'll see if I can get some if I can get any other input from people I work with, or as I said, who are user experience specialists, to see what they think.
Great, thank you. And I see that despite my promise to keep an eye on the chat, I missed a few things, but looking through it, I don't think I missed anything too important. Any last comments on this issue? Because I think, Clayton, you wanted to return to something we discussed last week. And if we move on, then we can squeeze in a third issue, especially if it's a relatively short follow-up. So let's see. Yes, this is the tab. It's was issue 3204810. Would you like to share your screen, or shall I keep sharing mine?
You can keep sharing yours.
And shall I scroll to the most recent comment?
Yeah. Oh, wow. I'd never noticed that most recent jump link before. That's amazing. I'm going to be using that every day now. So we heard back from the documentation team, and should I give a little background for others first?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is to separate what is currently a single permission for grant users access to admin pages and help pages, and break that into two separate permissions, one for accessing admin pages, one for accessing help pages. So we discussed this on our last UX call, and it was suggested that we one of us talk with someone on the documentation team, because they've been working on the help topics module, which aims to make the help section more usable. And so I did that, and they got back to me, which is great, and gave me an update on where the help topics initiative is at. And they said that if the help topics module does go from being a beta module to a stable, from experimental to stable, then help topics would replace the current hook help system. And anyone feel free to correct me, because this is starting to venture into technical land I do not fully understand.
I think that's right.
Cool. So then it seems like the question of how to move forward is do we update the current permission and separate it into two separate permissions under the current help system, or do we wait until that help topics work has been complete and then update the permission accordingly? There's not a specific ETA on when that help topics work will be complete and replace the existing help system. It's relatively close, but yeah, so that's the state of things. I think my personal take is, someone has written a patch for the existing system. I would think that this is something that those are permissions that should be separate anyway, even when the help topics work is complete. It sounds like there's probably some rework that would need to be done under the new help topic system, but so I don't know the degree of complexity there and how much rework would be necessary. But I would lean towards going forward with trying to resolve this issue under the current system, but very interested to hear what other people think.
So also, does the help topics module introduce its own permissions? And I guess my concern is that we might have a lot of churn if we introduce a new permission and then probably Drupal 10, we switch to the help topic system and it introduces a separate set of permissions. So that possible churn is the only thing that concerns me.
So my understanding of the help topic system is that there is a single overall permission of whether or not you can access help topics, and then from that, beyond that, if you do have access to those, you can then, as an administrator developer, define specific help topics to specific roles, which is pretty cool.
Right, so it doesn't seem to introduce a traditional Drupal permission. It has some sort of access control that's separate from the permission system, I think. But I just enabled the module, and if it did introduce permissions, there would be a link here. So I think that means it doesn't have any permissions of its own. So I think if help topics is not introducing any new permissions, and if you look at the meta issues for the help topics module, and they don't mention anything about adding or subtracting permissions, then I think we don't have to worry. I think that that it's sort of decoupled from this issue of separating the permission to see admin pages. So if I'm not being clear enough, I think it's okay to go ahead and work on this issue without worrying about help topics.
Yeah, because if help topics does introduce some kind of permissions in the future, which we don't know yet, but if it did, it's not hard to migrate that in an update hook. So don't see a problem with it personally.
So it looks like there is discussion of adding permissions. I'll put the link in it. Okay, so I just dropped the issue into the chat. Oh, which you suggested, Benji, maybe.
This is issue 2951565. It seems to have been postponed. I've commented on this issue, but I don't think I'm the one who came up with the suggestion to begin with. But the proposal is oh, maybe I did suggest it. So the suggestion is to add permissions to help topics that viewing a topic can be restricted to certain roles or permissions. And the proposed resolution is to be sort of like views, where each display gets to choose role or permission required to see it.
I kind of like that because oftentimes like the help system in Drupal is like as an experienced Drupal site builder, administrator, developer, whatever, like I don't need the help system. So if I'm setting up a site, I'll often neglect the help system unintentionally and forgetting that other people might find the help system useful. So if the help system can kind of, as you said, like views, and like this is proposing like attach itself, like each topic can attach itself to a role or permission depending on what's appropriate. Like if it's saying the node module, for instance, knows that, okay, to access, if a user has this permission, like access content, then or like administer content, then they're probably going to want these help topics. So if it can intelligently figure that out, then I think that's a really good thing to at least explore.
But still, I think this issue is still decoupled from the one we're talking about, because this would not introduce new permissions. This would allow you on a per page basis decide from existing permissions whether you want to require an existing permission to view the page.
Yes.
Okay, that's great.
And I wonder why it was postponed. Is there a comment? And I guess it's postponed just because there's disagreement about whether it's a good idea to have it in core. And it's something that presumably could be implemented in Contrib. Yeah. Okay, we're 5 minutes before the hour. Anything else anyone wants to bring up before we close?
I guess just to make sure I'm clear on how to move what to do next with this issue, I guess update the documentation team with what we discussed here, and then is it safe to tell the person who's been working on the patch for this issue, that there's interest in moving this along, and if he wants to re-roll it for the latest version of Drupal, then people can then review it?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fine.
Okay, great.
Okay, then still 4 minutes before the hour. Thanks all for attending. And we'll do it again next week. Hope to see many of you then.
Thanks.
Great,
Thanks.
thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.